Welcome to Digital Currents, brought to you by Morgan Creek Digital. I'm Xavier Segura. Each episode, we spotlight the topics and people changing the tech industry with a focus on AI, blockchain, chips, and big data. Thanks for listening, and please make sure to subscribe if you like what you hear. And remember, stay current.
Welcome, everybody, to Digital Currents. Mark could not be detained no matter risk of personal injury, travel, changes. He is here now. Mark,
I really want to and look, we're back in sync.
Oh, yeah.
We're wearing the Carolina blue. Now, you're wearing it different than me. I'm wearing it to celebrate the women's lacrosse winning the national championship last week. Perfect season.
Wow.
And the Tar Heel baseball team starting on the road to Omaha today here against Catholics from Holy Cross.
Nice.
And then just real quick, before I get into the whole long sordid tale, I decided that everyone this week was wearing orange pants. You know, Bitcoin, Las Vegas, everyone was wearing orange pants. So I went with green today, and I went with the Bitcoin roller coaster sock game.
Classic.
Because it's officially, not officially, but almost summertime. And I think we're in this zone of volatility. We saw a little bit of that. We made new all-time high a week ago,
right,
at $111,000 per Bitcoin, and it was slipping all the way back down, crashed all the way back down to 105,000, and people are freaking out. But
could that be because we seem to find these records always when there's a conference, right? If there's an ETH conference, ETH skyrockets. Now we've got Bitcoin. Obviously, there's more going on, but I just think a happy coincidence.
Well, and it's funny. So the reason, I was a little bit intrepid, and I was maybe not going to be able to make this recording at the normal time. We normally record Friday mornings, and
right.
I was supposed to be at the Bitcoin conference, supposed to fly overnight last night, Thursday night, and get in, 6 o'clock in the morning and be a little bleary-eyed. They say you shouldn't take overnight flights, but I just hate burning the whole day to travel. But then you take the overnight flight, and you burn the whole day because you feel like crap. But I just had a bad experience. Not that anybody cares about this, but so I'm out at the conference and excited to see everybody. And I go to the first event, so I got there at 9 o'clock in the morning, go to the first dinner, grab an appetizer, bite down.
Oh, no.
Long story short, one of those mini lamb chops, when they were cutting it, they left a shard of bone.
Oh, no. Fought back.
Cracked my back tooth in half.
Oh.
And, I looked for an emergency dentist in Vegas, and they all looked pretty dicey. I think, you know what? Maybe I could just go home tonight and go to my normal dentist. So I was able to get on the overnight flight, came back on Tuesday. Of course, they couldn't squeeze me in on Wednesday, but I got the procedure done yesterday. First of 3 procedures.
Wow.
Fix. Anyway, so in the TMI category, I will be fine. But
a lesser man wouldn't have dared try to make the trip or join. That's why Mark is my co-host, my partner, and my friend, and we're happy that he's here and fighting through, which is incredible. And no slurred speech. We were hoping there was not going to be a loophole.
It would have been a little dicey. I had the Novocaine, would have been a little tougher. But look, this was such an amazing. So I have major FOMO. Like I said, I didn't wear the orange pants because all the pictures I saw, everybody was wearing orange pants or orange dresses or orange shirts. All the orange hats. I'll tell you a couple of things that I observed. So one, the people that went and spoke.
Yeah.
We're talking, David has always run a good show. But from the, early days, a decade ago, when it was, a couple of people talking to each other, everybody, senators, vice president, all the glitterati. Michael Saylor spoke, half a dozen times. He's good. He's very, very compelling. Talked about, the new products, the Strike and Strife, and how he's going to disrupt the bond market, which is kind of an interesting concept. Think about this. So you got MSTR, strategy that's just basically a Bitcoin repository, or, we could call it a Bitcoin bank. He didn't like to be called a bank, but, let's call it a financial services company. And then he issued these prefs and these converts, and, they yield 8 and 10%. And they're backed by Bitcoin 6-1. So you're looking at that and you're like, okay, I could buy a bond with risk of default and make 5 or 6%, maybe 7 or 8% if I go to high yield where there really is risk of default. Or I could buy this new type of security. He had a very compelling argument why he was going to suck up all of the capital in the bond market, which, right. Okay, they won't, but they can get a big chunk. But the really funny part was, so guy said, well, what happens, when the MNAV, the market cap to NAV goes below 1? Isn't it game over and all your bonds will get called? And say, well, the bonds aren't callable. They're perpetual, which is kind of amazing. Because isn't like no interest and no maturity actually equity, but right bond? So anyway, but the second he said, and this is great, he said, well, think about it. If someone was dumb enough, I love the way he says, if someone was dumb enough to short my stock all the way down to $1, all I would do is issue a massive amount of bonds and buy back all my stock at a discount. Like, yes, you would, and make a lot of money doing it. And
it must be nice when you have that type of ability to draw on that line, Mark, right? Because, this is the funny thing of how to, avoid taxes for the 0.01%. It's, never sell your tax and just borrow, or never sell your stock, borrow against your equity and pay short-term cap gains. But if it goes down to 0, then I would imagine that strategy, or near to it, you'd have to have some other asset that you can collateralize, hence the Bitcoin, to be able to borrow.
Well, that's the thing is, like, if you're running a company, right, where there's risk of cash flow, okay, I can see that a short seller could sell it and maybe do something nefarious to hurt your business, spread bad rumors. But at the end of the day, it's Bitcoin. And that Bitcoin, and we keep talking about this, is a Bitcoin and will always be a Bitcoin. And all that changes is not the Bitcoin itself, but the currency in which we denominate it. And as we've all seen the graph, right? The M2 chart, right? M2, going vertical, and Bitcoin price following that, because we denominate the Bitcoin in these other currencies. And so in a world where every fiat must continue to devalue in order to service their debt, it's kind of an unassailable. I should have worn the Citadel socks, because it really is an unassailable castle. It's pretty amazing.
Right. And I think after a couple of short weeks listening to the show, my mother finally understood. I was trying to give her a basic allocation strategy for her portfolio. And I said, Mom, you should really have a little bit of exposure into Bitcoin, especially kind of looking at, the broader trends. And she's like, okay, I'm in. So that was the easiest thing. I said, you know what? I have a little Gemini account. I can serve as your custodian, your manager. And she said, that's wonderful. She said, how's it work? I'm like, well, this one happened to be priced at 88,000, which is kind of at the start of another cycle. So, Mom, here's a nice little return for you on this side. And, we can monitor that. And of course, if you ever need liquidity from this, we can always borrow against it. You don't have to sell it.
Yeah.
And so she really liked that. Is just enough of the appropriate risk exposure. And we saw that, even though we dipped a little bit to 106,000, the Fed, what did they say, Mark? Unlikely to reverse course anytime soon in the fall. So, as we're kind of looking at this accumulation pattern, there's this new narrative, right? It's this bull thesis now that we're kind of inquiring, but I'm sure you've heard a lot of that at the conference.
That is the one thing that was unmistakable at the conference, right? Which is the suits have arrived. We're actually going to do a webinar on this in a couple of weeks. The corporatization of Bitcoin has occurred.
Right.
And so there were dozens of company CEOs who have either converted their company to a Bitcoin treasury company, like Metaplanet and Blockchain Group and et cetera. In fact, as popular as Saylor was, I'm going to say Simon Garovich, who's the CEO of Metaplanet, was a very close second.
What?
I mean, it was the Metaplanet army was out in force. It was a sight to behold. It was amazing as, as a board member and as a it was incredible. So
to your point, Mark, we had the best month, right, of inflows. I'm seeing 5.7 billion since November, which was inauguration and or the winning of the election rather. And, that kind of shows that's really driven by these institutional folks. So when you look at companies like Metaplanet, they're really kind of driving this. We obviously had a little bit of a chuckle with GameStop not having such a successful go at it, but we're seeing people lean into this much more.
Yeah, the GameStop announcement, Ryan, look, he's a good CEO, but he fumbled this so badly.
Oh, yeah.
In terms of, I want to hide it. And he's like, I'm not going to call my shots. And, the Metaplanet guy's like, no, that's exactly what you do. You call your shot, then you create the energy, and then you ride the wave. And I don't get so. But whether it's GameStop or there were a dozen other companies who were starting to diversify their asset base, but what was amazing was the final panels. Again, I missed them, but I saw the video highlights. Were nation states announcing, I had the UK, had Nigel Farage there talking about them embracing it. I think it was Pakistan announced a strategic Bitcoin reserve. Now, Vance kind of talked about it, and Trump keeps yapping about it online, and Senator Lummis is doing her job. I mean, she was there and she, she's trying, but they just need to get it passed. So funny. I grew up with, the Schoolhouse Rock, and I'm just a bill thing is so, it was so amazing to learn how it actually works, right? A bill is just an idea, and then it eventually gets, the sticker that I'm a law. And, we're still a ways away from that. But at the end of the day, they announced 30,000 people. I'm going to say probably 20-ish, 20-something. But a lot of people were there. Lots of people took time out. If Peter Schiff showed up, I mean, the biggest quote-unquote Bitcoin hater. No, look, he's an engagement farmer for sure. And he brought his whole family, took a picture of the whole family on the private jet. I'm like, oh, God, Peter, you're so tone deaf. But
super.
Anyway, and, making silly claims on the internet like, I'm responsible for more people being in Bitcoin than any other human because he was so negative that like, you really think we care about you that much? Like, no, you're anyway.
Well,
but he was out. Everyone was there. And I will say the momentum is real. And so why is the price going down? Why is the price going down? Again, remember, if you're big and you need to deploy a lot of capital, you actually don't want the price to go up right away. You actually want to, and maybe that's what GameStop's doing, right? Is they know they want to invest $5 billion. So maybe they're like, wow, we really, I'm gonna fumble and make it appear that I'm a bumbling idiot. And so people push my stock price down so then I can go, issue, I don't know. Actually, it doesn't work so much with stock prices as much as Bitcoin price. But if you want to buy Bitcoin, you would like it to be lower priced than higher price.
Mm-hmm. So you tell me, Mark, then if some of these themes, if you felt them there at the conference, 'cause I'm just reading a couple things on people's reactions and definitely, on the front lobe of everybody's thinking is the institutional adoption by far and away. The other was this idea of the growing ecosystem of beyond use cases and solutions and scalability. So of course, giving a shout out to Layer 2 Solutions, Lightning, our friend of the fund and investment portfolio company, Jack Mahlers. He's unveiling the low interest Bitcoin backed loans at Strike. He's not the first, but this is going to be something that is going to continue to be powered using the rails of the little b, right? And I think this is going to be one of those that's going to be trying to have the single digit interest rates, but then also in a world where I'm having a greater accumulation pattern. I had to explain to mom, what a wallet was. And she's like, oh, I have one, Apple Pay. And I'm like, well, that's actually pretty good. That's a step in the right direction. But now this is a specific kind of wallet, but it's just for digital assets, which is way more secure. And so she got that. Yeah, okay, it's another kind of Apple Pay. I was like, yeah, that's kind of one way to think about it. Yep. Except there's a bigger, computing network. All good. But the idea that, they're offering loans from, this is the thought I thought was pretty interesting, 10K over to 1 billion. That's a pretty big spread, right? I want to see somebody take a 1 billion.
Look, Jack is one of the kings of hyperbole, and good for him. He's a great spokesman. And I do think the use cases of Bitcoin and this building up of the network, we've talked about this a lot of times about, look, there's a world in which you have all these single use case L1s that do different things, and you got smart contracts to do stuff, and you got Bitcoin to do stuff, and you got, chains to do stuff, and bridges to do stuff. Yeah, but that's complicated, and so far it really hasn't worked. What to me is actually more logical is Bitcoin is it's the safest, most secure, biggest network, most validators, no downtime. And then you build on top of that using L2s and L3s. And they set a Guinness Book of World Records. Now, what were they competing against? Themselves, I guess, but they set a Guinness Book of World Records, and they did over 4,000 Bitcoin transactions in a day. They did a thing at Steak and Shake, and a bunch of people went, and they were, selling stuff at the exhibit hall, and people could buy stuff with Bitcoin. And there is a world in which that will happen. Today, it's like, I don't walk around with gold bars in my pocket. I use the layer 3s and L2s, and actually L4s, the Visa network. I just use my Visa card or my Apple Wallet, which is just my Visa card saved on the app, right? Which is kind of funny. But the abstraction of Bitcoin into a replacement for Swift, Fedwire, ACH, etc. Yeah, I can definitely see that. And there is a world and I say it all the time, like where my youngest granddaughter, 2 years old, she'll never have a leather wallet, right? I mean, she'll have no need for a leather wallet because she won't know what paper money is.
And good riddance, Mark, because I lose my leather wallets, plural, multiple times a month, which at this point, almost like a joke in the household. But, I'll say that, within the conference, the idea also that came through in addition to like building out all the ecosystem was a really big advancement when it came to regulation. And this is not, what I thought was interesting, Mark, was obviously the U.S. stuff, which we could talk a lot about and we can go into some detail. But one thing I wanted to kind of point to was there's also international legislation. So we kind of poke fun a little bit at Europe, especially when it comes to holidays and things in the summer, tech advancement, you name it. We like to have a little fun. We mean it all in good form. But really, there was an interesting story that came out there, Mark. Wonder if it was around when you were there. So one of the political hopefuls over in the UK, leader of the Reform Party, Nigel Farage, I hope I'm pronouncing that properly. Yeah. So he unveiled a very ambitious pro-crypto agenda, Mark. The highlights of this, I think, maybe we can learn some things here. Okay, so if he's elected, first step, he would ban banks from debanking crypto users. I think that's a good thing. Interesting point. He's kind of eating in the middle of this, President Trump proposal of removing all taxes on crypto that are onshored, and he's sort of capping crypto capital gains at 10%. And he rejects the creation of a CBDC, which was also a pretty different move. I'm sure the maxis were going crazy hearing this, but you don't really hear too much radical crypto policy coming out of London. I'm sure in Piccadilly Square, people must be painting the town red if this kind of made it that far to get elected.
Painting the town orange, right? I mean, this is real. This is real. And look, a year ago, which it's hard to believe that was only a year ago. A year ago in Nashville,
Right.
You know, Trump, on advice from a handful of people, said all these things that were pro-crypto, pro-Bitcoin to a bunch of Bitcoin people. And everyone went crazy. The crowd went crazy. And he was like, oh, okay. And these guys are single issue voters. They'll vote for me. And, of course, the Bitcoiners claim they won the election for Trump. Whatever. I mean, maybe on the margin, did that group that came late become a swing vote? I think it actually did.
An orange wall.
And it was pretty awesome to see, Ross was there speaking, now free. And Trump said a year ago in Nashville, I will free Ross, right? Who's serving a life sentence for creating software, which is so insane, right? I mean, to say that someone who builds something that people use for nefarious purposes is responsible for the people doing the nefarious purposes. So anyone who built an airplane is liable for terrorist acts on airplanes, or anyone who built a highway where trucks carrying drugs, I mean, you're responsible. I mean, that's just silly. But anyway, 2 life sentences, but now he's free, and he spoke, and it was awesome. And I mean, I wasn't there, but I saw the video, and he's amazing. And Nigel got the message. Like, wait, Trump was losing, and then he won because he got all these single issue voters. Now, I don't know if there are as many orange-pilled people in the UK as the US. I don't know. I mean, there certainly could be. My guess is probably not quite the same swing factor, but if the race is close, it could be a real deal. And ultimately, we have a nation state FOMO, right? And we just did a webinar on this, a couple weeks ago, and our other partner, our silent partner, we should have him come on sometime. We should do all three of us. We'll do that. But Sutton wrote his PhD thesis on this idea of nation states adopting Bitcoin, and the game theory is pretty amazing, right? If you choose not to, and everyone else chooses to, you definitely lose. Like you literally lose. Like if you choose China or the US, right? If you're a small country and you decide, I want to partner with China versus US, that's a choice that has implications, and people have made that choice. And, I noticed the first time I went to Mexico, and every sign was about Huawei 5G. It wasn't about Verizon or AT&T. It was about Huawei. So they clearly made a decision, right? And, the world is bifurcating into these two tech hubs, the US and China, and you pretty much have to choose. So there's game theory there. And here you got fiat versus Bitcoin, and you have to choose as a nation state. And, people laughed at El Salvador, right? And they've looked pretty smart so far. And I think they will look smart forever, but it's coming. The wave is coming. And that was clear and abundant. That was the other thing about, again, I was only there for 12 hours, but walking around the halls, the diversity of people from all over the world, and a lot of people traveled a long way to come to Vegas. Now, some of it's just to come to Vegas, but I think there are a lot of, global Bitcoiners.
Yeah. And I think, maybe steal some of the thunder from Bitcoin. And what we're not supposed to say is the other, I guess it's a 3-letter acronym, but I guess it's a 4-letter word in Vegas, is ETH, right? So we shouldn't talk about that, but on a single day, the Bitcoin and the Ethereum ETFs, they racked in $1 billion of inflows. We're seeing prices begin to rise because it's a theory, not a theory, I guess it's an observation. I think it's pretty much resolved at this point that when Bitcoin goes up, it raises the rest of the layer twos. But then also to pull the thread market we're talking about when it comes to the regulatory clarity, as Bitcoin becomes more regulated, so do the layer twos. So fresh off of the heels of a lot of this excitement, speaking about this a little bit more in broader strokes, we also started to see some support for other alts and other offerings that are on their way. So we saw a couple of things. We saw the SEC clarifying staking, which was huge in my opinion, because this is more of a line in the sand that's getting drawn, albeit kind of slowly and specifically, which I think is a good thing. And they're basically just confirming that in certain staking activities, such as individual or pooled staking, custody, which is a big one, that doesn't constitute the offer or sale of securities. Mark, how many times were we pulling our hair out over the last couple of years when, there was some disagreement when it came to regulating authorities versus technologists about staking, which is, the growing effectively of rewards on an asset like Ethereum for participation in the network and making sure that the transactions are happening, which is vital to keeping the whole system afloat. So I think the SEC slipping that in was really important. And then, of course, I think simplicity and brevity are the soul of wit, to quote Joan Didion, is to say that the Bipartisan Clarity Act, right? You love the word clarity. Digital Asset Market Clarity Act. Long anticipated bill, regulatory framework. It really kind of clarifies the SEC and the CFTC in oversight and enforcement. Nice to see an olive branch going across the aisle in these turbulent and divisive time between Republicans and Democrats. And it's really mandating disclosures from developers and imposing these compliance standards on brokers and dealers, and really kind of trying to establish firms that are going to operate legally in the U.S., which ultimately is going to protect people like my mom that are relying upon a system that is familiar to them as they come from TradFi into this, I guess, TradFi Plus, because it's not quite DeFi if you have some of these onboarders. But Mark, as we were mentioning, Bitcoin starts to move in a more excited fashion with people jumping aboard from institutional investment standpoint. Those people have constituents, which are AKA the people that they helped get elected through the growth of Bitcoin. So you have Bitcoin creating a whole new wave of positivity here for the entire digital asset ecosystem.
No, look, the positive energy is real. The momentum is real. By the way, so everybody knows, X was very nice and sent me a little birthday present, and he sent me a couple pairs of socks. One that says, don't bug me, I'm gaming. And the other one was, don't bug me, I'm playing my guitar. And I appreciate both those. So thank you very much. But
of course.
So the Epic Games launcher just tried to take over my computer. So I think it updated last night, and it's, anyway. So guilty as charged, playing the games. But although I'm still just totally obsessed with Monster Hunter Wilds. It's just unbelievable. But
classic. So Clarity replacing basically, Mark, it's going to be
the momentum
21. Yeah.
The momentum is so real, and it's interesting. So there were other of the ABCDs at the conference. So there were there were miners, right? We met with a bunch of mining companies, and they were there with their machines, their chips, their ASICs, and there's one Auradine that has arguably one of the first American-made chips, and they were there, and and you had core scientific guys there talking about their new data centers and their transition to AI data centers. And so the chips were on display. And we all know that without the chips, right, without the miners, without the ASICs, there is no Bitcoin, right?
Yeah.
The Bitcoin network is basically a computer network that is made up of these advanced chips doing cryptographic security. Now, what was interesting is, I think it was on Wednesday, Google announced that based on their estimates, and I thought the timing was very sus, to use a Generation Alpha term that I hear my son say all the time. It's very sus. That it would only take 1 million qubits to break SHA-256, and that Bitcoin wasn't safe from quantum. And like, okay. And people freaked out, and the price actually dipped. And I'm like, okay, time out. First of all, no one is anywhere close to 1 million qubits. I mean,
Yeah.
not close. And 1 million is very different than 1,000 or 10,000. It's orders of magnitude different. So, okay, Google, I get it. You know, more attention for us. Our stock price needs to go up. And you guys are all talking about Bitcoin. Stop. Okay, fine. You succeeded. But people fretting over quantum, I don't really understand. And, you know, people like Adam Back say best, like, we'll just change the cryptography standard the same way that, you know, when 286 went to 386, went to 486, went to Pentium, as computers got stronger and stronger, CPUs, we had to create better cryptography. I mean, the old days of cryptography literally were strings of letters that you wrote and you had a decoder ring. Like
Right,
I grew up
exactly.
getting out of the cereal box. I mean, and you rotated the ring and you looked at the thing and that was ciphers. And then they figured out better ways to encrypt things. And so the idea that someone won't come up with new cryptographic security to address new compute is kind of silly. But that aside, if these quantum computers were to be created, which they haven't been yet, but, you know, we'll see, would they go after Bitcoin first?
Right.
Or
Big question.
like nuclear codes or JP Morgan or a bunch of other stuff? I mean, just because you can hack Bitcoin doesn't mean necessarily that you should. And my thing on this is, the problem is, okay, you could crack SHA-256. Okay, fine. And you could change a block.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. But we've had this conversation. Once you do that, once there is a 51% attack, the value goes to zero.
Right.
So everything you just stole disappears, and the other members will just fork to a new chain. Remember, Bitcoin, the current Bitcoin, is not, I mean, it's the longest chain. It's the quote unquote original chain, but other people have broken off, like BSV and et cetera. And that's the way the network effect works. So
Right.
Yeah, you could crack it, but it doesn't mean you'll actually steal anything of value. And I think that's maybe the most genius thing about, you know, what Satoshi created.
As we turn, Mark, to the Charter Week, we'll do something special here, because we wanted to kind of show a little bit of those that were not at the conference, kind of what you can expect from those that did attend, and we have a little bit of some slideware of some of the interesting images taken by our senior associate Ryan, who was in attendance. So I will share these awesome images, and Mark, see if they conjure up any memories or thoughts. And of course, as we say, anytime you're at, a big conference, the show is often outside as opposed to being inside.
Oh, yeah. Yeah,
What
yeah.
is going on in the periphery, the people that you can meet, the dinners, the breakfasts, the conversations in the hallway in between the sessions. Those are, in my opinion, the most valuable parts of really any large scale conference.
It's all the community. And there were some amazing, like the On-Chain Monkey gang was out in force, and they did a bunch of events, and there's some great, pictures and videos of guys doing rock climbing together and doing a little yoga in the morning and just, exchanging ideas and wearing swag. And so the community element, like I said, the Metaforce Army. I mean, there's a video of them handing out hats. It was a feeding frenzy. I mean, it was an absolute feeding frenzy how excited people are to be part of that particular community. So to your point, all the intersecting communities that kind of converge at these conferences is really what it's all about.
Right. So getting that up here. Let's see. Let me know if the screen, once I can decide to share, the best way to do that. I have a series of images. So why don't we pull up the first one? This is always the point of the show. I'll remind our audience, check us out on YouTube. That community is growing. We appreciate all of the support that we've been seeing on there because we love to just interact with you all. And that just creates an even greater opportunity to do so. So I will kind of share this here. Why don't I start with this first one here, because this probably sums up a lot of what makes this moment in particular really special. So let's hit this. Okay. So this is, the man of the hour, Mark. Let's see if we can zoom in a little bit more on this guy here. He's up on stage, and he is, of course, showing a couple of the stats of the company here, right? So 50 tons of gold, right? And over 100,000 Bitcoin held there in reserve. And of course, what they are referring to here is kind of the treasure trove, 13 billion in profit in 24. Mark, these are just some remarkable stats of the success that come from holding a Bitcoin related strategy. Not always, because we've seen some companies have some starts and some stops. But this is kind of showing a little bit about, this is the CEO of Tether, and he's showing that Paolo Ardoni, if I pronounce that last name correct. I've been terrible this morning, Mark, with last names. I will admit that. And so really, why Tether in the Bitcoin conference? Because Tether, in my opinion, Mark, is one of the stable coins that is most in use. You can argue if it's the best or not for another show, but it's really this onboarding, this liquid bilayer between the fiat world and the digital asset world. I use that to just get in digital assets, and now I can get in and out of Bitcoin. And it's kind of showing that there is just a ton of assets that he has, when a lot of people question, if there's a there. So I thought this was kind of very telling. And again, one of the celebrities that was part of this.
Look, Tether is, on a per person basis, I think one of the, if not the most profitable companies in the world, in terms of how much money they make per employee. It's an amazingly, obviously, people light business. It's an extraordinary global network. Now you see 420, I think, memeable million users globally. So you think about that, that's starting to be a pretty darn meaningful number, because, until you're a certain age, call it, 18, you're not part of the financial system. And above a certain age, you're not that active in the financial system. So in the active population, you're talking maybe 10% of the global population, maybe a little less. That's a big number. And, you're talking about ginormous numbers. I mean, one of the largest holders of treasury bills in the world, which you think, so that's why Cantor Fitzgerald bought a piece of these guys and, is one of the primary dealers. And now, the former CEO is now the Secretary of Commerce. So there's a lot of stuff going on globally in terms of digitizing the monetary system. And whether you like them or not, and whether you trust them or not, or whether you think it's sketchy that they're based in the Bahamas or whatever, they had ties to FTX. Yes, it's all true. But at the end of the day, numbers don't lie. And this is a meaningful part. I don't know if they have the number of transactions, but
it's massive. So we'll throw up another one for you, Mark, that's probably a little less controversial, but we at least wanted to show that, these guys are, one of the leaders right now, right? And will they remain the leader tomorrow? Nobody really knows. But what is kind of a little less disputable is let's throw up a picture, Mark, of our friend Jack. And what is he standing in front of here? He is standing in front of a growth of Bitcoin and traditional assets kind of side by side. He's got the Bitcoin on one column, gold in another, and the S&P on the right over an 11-year period. Mark, I thought this was a pretty interesting display here. Again, more of what we talk about on digital currency. So we could easily have a conference with all the facts that we produce for our audience. Mark, seeing this in black and white, or I guess for the chart, because those that are on audio only, this is black and orange and green. It's pretty remarkable.
It is remarkable. So, I mean, you're looking at over every single period, from 1 to 11 years, compounded, Bitcoin has outperformed all the other financial assets that are meaningful, meaning the S&P and gold. What I think is interesting is over most of those periods now, gold has beaten the S&P. People think of gold as not being very important, but, gold has done 60+% better than the S&P over those 11 years. And part of the reason, the reason, simple reason, is money supply. Right? Yeah. I mean, post-COVID, the U.S. in particular, and China to a lesser extent, but similar, there was an explosion of money creation that diluted the value of everything denominated in fiat. So yes, the S&P makes new all-time highs, but that's because we're pricing it in fiat. If you priced it in gold, it's actually the same price as 1996.
Wow, that's crazy stuff.
Which is crazy. And look, gold is money. And money is an asset that exists in the absence of a liability. And gold has been money for 5,000 years. Now, everybody's saying, well, Bitcoin's money for the next 5,000 years. And I actually agree with that because it's digital gold. It's more divisible, more portable. And part of what this is reflecting is, again, the Bitcoin or the ounce of gold didn't change over any of these periods. The ounce of gold stayed an ounce of gold. The Bitcoin stayed a Bitcoin. What changed is the number of dollars and yen and euros and all these things that we use to value it. And so if you save in fiat, your value is being taken back from you through this tax of inflation. If you save in gold or Bitcoin, you are getting wealthier in terms of purchasing power relative to the fiat. Because the stat that still, it boggles my mind when I say it out loud that 80% of all the dollars that have ever been created, right? We've been a republic for 249 years, right? 250th birthday next year. 249 years, 80% in the last 5 years. That's just mind-numbing. And that's why these numbers are so compelling and why they're so important. And it isn't going to get better, right? Because the opposite of money is credit. And JP Morgan said it first, and now everybody's saying it, is, gold is money, everything else is credit. Bitcoin is money, everything else is credit. And credit isn't evil in and of itself, but it is fleeting in the sense that it sows the seeds of its own demise over time without government discipline.
Right.
Kind of like the oxymoron. It's like military intelligence, which is not fair because a lot of military people are really smart. But, jumbo shrimp is a better one. Jumbo shrimp. There's no
Jumbo shrimp. Right.
So, although there are those, they're called prawns. But the key here is this isn't going to change. And because no, it has to change. Well, the rate of growth will change. And it's just the law of large numbers, right? I mean, when you start with $1 billion in market cap, getting to $2 billion is a big deal. Getting $3 billion is half again as big. Getting $4 billion is a third again as big. So that's the way compounding works. But the likelihood that any government prints less money, no way. It's just the math doesn't flip.
Right. And there's another graphic here. Let me pull it up right here. So this one I think is an important one. Happy 100th episode on digital currents. Our centennial. Bitcoin is above 100. So is digital currents. And I think, just want to start here by saying a huge thank you to my partner, my co-host, my friend, Mark. It's been awesome. I feel as energetic and enthusiastic. We say it many times. This is my favorite part of the week. It really kind of starts the week in reverse as we kind of look back what happened. It sets us ready for our IC, which is on Monday. And many times we come fresh from the ideas of this show, preparing for you all into what our next investment opportunities are going to look like, because we said, oh, you know what, this is a hot topic. Let's figure out how we can make this into the portfolio. Or the opposite. We figure out, actually, this is kind of a trending in another direction. We got to figure out how to best capitalize off of this. So I want to send a huge thank you first and foremost, Mark, to you, the legend that you are, and also to the broader digital currency community. I think we have one now. We've got, just an amazing engaged audience that's growing every day. And I look forward to continue doing this as it's one of the highlights of my week.
No, I echo all those sentiments, and thank you to you for your organization and leadership of the show. And I can just sit back and riff. But the real shout out obviously is to the audience, and we do this for you and with you. So we do appreciate the engagement. This is, and this, I say it is, and it's not just, drivel. It is the highlight of my week. I love the experience of doing it. I love the discussion, the debate, the dialogue, and I love the engagement. I love the fact, right? In Vegas, multiple people come up to you and say, hey, I love listening to you every Saturday. I have my coffee with you every Saturday morning. I'm like, it's actually really, really cool. And it's happened to me all over the world. I had a pilot of one of the airplanes I was on come out and say, hey, I saw your name on the list, and I just want to say I listened to your show, and
Awesome.
just all kinds of fun stuff. So we are grateful for everyone who listens. It is pretty cool to have achieved the 100th show, going strong for the better part of a couple years.
Mhm.
And just more to come, and so much to talk about, so much opportunity ahead of us, and so much excitement to share with everybody.
Yeah, I feel like I'm not close. We're not close to slowing down anytime soon. I feel like we're just beginning to really kind of find out, what the show is even about. As I remember a time we weren't talking about the ABCDs, we actually preceded that, and we kind of now have followed this trend of figuring out what the best market stories are, both in the publics and the private. There were a time we didn't talk about publics that much. Folks really like that conversation. And of course, I think we're macro driven, but we also really kind of dive in the details of a particular technology. So, what's more to come is more of the same, giving the people what they want, and definitely stay tuned and say a huge thank you. And as I always do to close out the show, remind our listeners, rate, review, subscribe. That greatly helps people find the show. Check us out on YouTube, where you can see the chart of the week, the Bitcoin stock game reveal, and of course our awesome charts. And thanks, and a quick kind of line, no particular order. Nick Taylor, Ryan Abronsky, and Tim, and Will, everybody that kind of helps this, Mitra in the scenes. And if I did not name you, thank you even more, because I forgot to name you. But as always, a reminder, listeners, to stay current. Thank you for joining us this week on Digital Currents. Check out our links to our website and social media in the show's description box. Please make sure to subscribe if you like what you hear. And remember, stay current.
This podcast should not be construed as investment advice nor solicitation for the sale of any security, advisory, or other service. Investment themes and ideas discussed may be owned by funds managed by the host and podcast guests. Any conflicts at the time of production have been mentioned by the host but are subject to change. Listeners should consult their personal financial advisors before making any investment decisions.